So, nonsense in a foreign language. What do we do with it? This play, of course, written in French, translated into English, but we have to have that translation of sort of the nonsense into a foreign language. What's nonsense look like in a language that isn't ours? How do we translate it so that it remains nonsensical but maintains the same feeling? Clearly, we all, as members of a culture, have things that we sort of attribute to that culture, right? Things that are funny in that culture, things that are unusual about that culture, things that we can make fun of in that culture, right? If you are from, for example, the United States, we may make fun of the fact that we really love this, standard measurements, right? I mean, again, I think I've mentioned before the Nate Bargatze speech about the idea of George Washington, right, talking about the weights and the measures that we're going to have in our own country, and how weird it is that we decided to use some, and that we just rejected the rest of the world's weights and measures, right? We may make fun of that in America, right? You couldn't make fun of that as a French person about yourself, right? The French use the metric system, so if you're trying to translate something, you either have to make it clear that, oh, I'm doing this joke from the perspective of an American, who has this other system of weights and measures, because it wouldn't make sense if a French person said, yes, and I love, using feet and inches, and there are 12 inches in a foot, but we don't have any word for what 10 inches is, right? For the French, it's not funny, right? It's not really going to work as well, right? They could eventually come to understand it, but it's not theirs, right? And so the nonsense, the things that we find funny in our own language, in our own culture, right, are often based on sort of our own stereotyping of our own systems. So when we translate these things, do we make them, how do we make them make sense, right? Does the bald soprano work in English? I certainly think it does. I think it works better in French. I do. I think it's more unusual in French. And my apologies, my eyes today are. I think I'm experiencing some extra special allergies today. Is a fun, fun bonus to the season. But we do have in this play a lot of insistence on language, culture, things that we would find odd, and that, as watchers, as viewers, as readers, that we find very odd. And this brings us to this part of this conversation where things turn a little bit. We do find The Bald Soprano, I believe, to be an amusing play, right? It's ridiculous. These people are nonsensical. They talk over each other. They have very odd sort of observations. They're not very smart. When the Martins come, they can't figure out who each other are, right? They can't figure themselves out. And then when they talk with each other, they just can't communicate, right? Communication doesn't work. And I think that is where we start to understand either that we can see this play as sort of a funny take on what does it mean to try to learn a language? What does it mean to use a language properly? If we don't, we can't communicate and things get a little bit madcap. But I think we can go further. I think that based on where we know that Ionesco eventually travels to in his plays, eventually, right, landing in Rhinoceros, and, even in a play like Exit the King, which is a very, very unusual and very different play, that we have a situation where we understand how fragile language can be. We change one vowel in a word and it becomes a completely different word. We change, one sound, one piece of pronunciation, and suddenly we have a sentence that no longer makes sense. We put the emphasis on the wrong syllable and suddenly things are nonsensical. Communication is a very, very tricky technical thing. as people learning foreign languages, right? If you ever learned a foreign language before, if you've ever been on Duolingo before, I think we see that, right? Duolingo is an excellent example. I think that we will associate in many cases with the Bald Soprano. We learn how to say things on Duolingo that make no sense. In the past couple of months, I've kept a little, list of things that are just ridiculous that I've said in Spanish with Duo, including things like, the man has so many ears. Why would I ever say that? What benefit is it to me to learn this? Well, sure, as a language learning device, I'm learning the words for ears. I'm learning the words for so many. I've learned the word for man or woman or child or him or her. But as a sentence, does it work, right? Can I use it, right? If I use that in the middle of a sentence, right, people are going to look at you and say, I'm sorry, the man has too many ears. Who? What man has too many ears? Why does he have so many ears? What's going on? And Duolingo isn't shy about doing this, right? It knows what it wants to teach you. It knows what it knows the thing it needs to teach you. In this particular case, right, you're trying to learn how to say so many. You're trying to learn how to talk about quantities. Great, fantastic. We just learned, right, about bodies and body parts, and so we're, exploring, remembering what body parts we've talked about, right? And so, logically, okay, you can make the leap. But in a regular sentence, would you? No, absolutely not. And if you translate it in English and you use it in a sentence, then people start to look at you as if you're a serial killer, right? And so this particular play is full of lines and full of phrases and full of turns of phrase and descriptions that turn people into sociopaths, right? When we hear the stories later on in the section with the firefighter, right? The fireman shows up and everybody starts talking and wants to share stories, and they share these nonsensical, ridiculous stories that don't make a lot of sense. But again, right? Is this something that happens? Do people get together as a couple to sort of swap stories? Sure they do. Do they swap those kinds of stories? Goodness, no, they don't. And again, am I overanalyzing the play? Well, sure, we all are. We're all going to overanalyze this play because, again, it is part of what makes the theater of the absurd so interesting, right? When we watch it, when we read it, we understand that something has gone terribly wrong with language, or that something has gone terribly wrong with our own ears, right? We suddenly don't understand each other, right? Is this descent into madness? Is this just language learning, right? The language grammar textbook taken to the extreme? Certainly. But what does that mean for us? I think it makes us look at language differently. I think it makes us look at what we can get out of a language and also the things that we cannot get out of a language and that we cannot take for granted when it comes to a language. So there will be one or two more things I want to talk about with this particular week, but again, we're going to analyze one or two other scenes here, and then we're going to sort of wrap it all up and talk about, when we move forward, right, and we go into, right, I guess the next thing we're going to be looking at is Genet. When we go into Genet and talk about, right, authority and power, we're kind of looking at authority and power from the same right viewpoint that we're looking at language, right? Can we trust it? Can we understand it? Can we expect it to be the way that it should be? And if it isn't the way that we expect it to be, what do we do about it? So, right, couple scenes analyzed, and then we'll be back. And then we'll move on. So, yeah.